Hey there, folks, and welcome to Bread and Poetry, a podcast about poetry and bread for everyone. I'm your host, Diannely Antigua, Poet Laureate of Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and Poet Laureate of your hearts. On this podcast, we talk to the people in our community, the poets and the non-poets alike, about poetry and what it means to them. In the words of Roque Dalton, I believe the world is beautiful, and poetry, like bread, is for everyone. With me today is Mike Nelson, former Poet Laureate of Portsmouth and now chair of the Portsmouth Poet Laureate program. I'll read his bio first. Mike grew up in New Hampshire and has been hanging around the poetry scene of Portsmouth and the seacoast for the last 20 years. He has been participating in Beat Night for 18 of its 23 years and hosting and organizing it for the last 8. Mike has 3 collections of poetry and is working on a 4th. Mike was the 11th Poet Laureate of Portsmouth from 2017 to 2019 and is currently the chair of the Portsmouth Poet Laureate program. He is also on the board of the Poetry Society of New Hampshire, the founder of Hive Poetry Project, B Monk Press, and Space B Studio. Welcome, Mike.
Hi, Diannely.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. I'm very happy to be here.
Well, I'm happy that you're here too. This is an honor beyond honors to have a former poet laureate to interview on the podcast. And yeah, this is awesome.
Oh, the honor is all mine.
All right. So let's break bread.
Okay.
You're ready.
I'm ready.
Yeah.
Where's the bread?
So in your bio, you talk about your connection to Portsmouth and the surrounding areas. What other connections do you have to this area, and what changes have you witnessed from being in this area for quite some time?
Yeah, my first experience of Portsmouth, I technically grew up in Hudson, New Hampshire, and Londonderry later, but I remember a 6th grade field trip to Strawberry Bank, and that was, I still have vivid memories of that, pulling into town in the bus and going past the graveyards and just being really like, from a kid who just was out in the woods his whole life. That was like my first experience of like kind of like a city, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I loved it. And then I loved Strawberry Bank. And I actually kind of had, this might be a whole other podcast, but I had kind of a ghost experience.
Well, you know what? I'm going to write a note and we might talk about that later.
Okay. But that didn't deter me from loving Portsmouth. And so, yeah. And then I lived in South Berwick for 20 years. And that's, 20 years ago, when I started coming to poetry readings and in my early 30s. So, maybe I was 30, actually. Yeah, 30 years old. But I loved everything about Portsmouth already. But then when I discovered the poetry scene, I was just so hooked. And there were other readings going on at the time, like Stone Pigeon reading, but the Hoot and Beat Night both started at the same time, around the same time. Portsmouth is still my favorite poetry haunt.
Haunt. Ghosts.
Oh, that's right. Ooh. Yeah, that's right.
And you know what? I mean, not to spoil it for the readers, but I feel like that kind of goes in line with some of the things that we might talk about later.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about the Portsmouth Poet Laureate program and maybe even some of the work that you've done as Poet Laureate when you were in that position, and maybe more about like the mission of the program. Yeah.
Yeah, the mission was very appealing to me right from the start because it's all about community, and that's the mission statement. It's like they're building community with poetry. It's started 25 years ago. I think Paula Race and Mimi White were the ones who sort of headed it up. And I mean, incredible honor to be a part of the program. And when I was laureate, I wanted to bring poetry to people who didn't normally have an experience with it, and even thinking of it as a therapeutic tool. And so I did like 3 poetry classes during that time, the one at the Chase Home for Children and the Recovery Center over there. Now the name of it is escaping me.
Listeners, after recording, Mike remembered it was Safe Harbor Recovery Center, and they can be reached at granitepathwaysnh.org.
We went to the International Institute of New England in Manchester, actually, who deals with refugees and immigrants, and the state laureate at the time, Alice Fogel, and I did a class there with them. And yeah, it was great. And we tried to put those poems into books and make them part of other things. Like we did the Beat Festival, and we got one of those refugee participants to come to that. And that became a fundraiser also. And so that was the goal of my term. Plus, we got lucky, and the Prescott Park Arts Festival let us do poetry in the park before every week, all summer long, for 2 summers, doing poetry for just people. We snuck up on them. They were there for the play, and then we were like, just before the play, we're going to give you some poetry.
Yeah.
But it was great. So yeah,
that's awesome. And I guess, how did that role transition into now being chair of the program?
I think I had such a good experience, and I just wanted to give back to it, in another way, and be part of the future of the program, which is you're sort of heralding in, I think, I hope, like a new era of the program, bringing a whole different style and kind of poetry and perspective and everything to the whole thing. So it's really great. It's, like I said before, it's an honor for me to be a part of that with you, and and part of this, and just watch you do what you're doing, and engaging the community and building community with poetry in your own way.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Okay, so now is the time for my favorite question. What's your favorite kind of bread?
Okay, this wasn't too hard to think of this. It's garlic bread.
Ooh, yes.
Yeah, because I grew up, I have an Italian mother, and I was lucky to have an Italian mother who cooked for us all the time. And very specifically, though, she would make her own sauce, and it would simmer on the stove all day. But then it's like when it got close to dinner time, the garlic bread was made and put in the oven, and the smell of the garlic bread toasting. And then the best thing, even better than the pasta, was just like that garlic bread sopping up that homemade spaghetti sauce. Was just nothing better than that. So yeah,
Damn.
And to this day, I love making my own garlic bread and feeding it to people.
Wow.
Yeah. Have it. Please eat the garlic bread.
Oh man, that sounds so good. I'm so hungry right now.
There's some good garlic bread in this town too. If you gotta go out some Italian restaurants, there's some good garlic bread around here.
Good to know. Yeah. I might ask you more about that later.
Okay.
So on the theme of bread, tell us a beautiful or powerful or even challenging memory that includes bread. And it doesn't have to be the favorite kind that you mentioned.
I don't know if there's a challenging. Another awesome bread memory, which is, again, has to do with garlic bread. I don't know if you've ever been to Bread and Puppet in Vermont, but it's an outdoor poetry festival. They still do things. I'm not sure what they're doing these days, but they used to have camping up there. And this was back in the 90s. And you could go up there, and they had this big outdoor bread oven, and you just would go up, and they were just making bread right there, putting it in the oven, pulling it out, just very unceremoniously chopping it up. And they had this big vat of olive oil and garlic, and they were just like,
wow,
this big brush, and they were just like slapping olive oil and garlic all over this just made bread, and you just stand there in this open field and eat it, and it was amazing. Yeah.
That sounds really magical and like almost otherworldly.
It was, yeah. It was great.
Like, that sounds like the best thing. Like, what a vision of beauty that must have been to experience that bread. And then there was poetry, you said, as well.
And there's poetry, and a great poetry memory from that festival at the time. I got to meet one of my poetry heroes, which was Galway Cannell, who was still alive at the time.
Wow.
And he lived in Vermont. And I didn't know he was going to be there, but they had this little thing out in the woods, and he showed up and read poetry, and I got to shake his hand and just briefly talk to him. And what an amazing experience, to meet Galway Cannell. And now he's gone.
Yeah. I mean, so many poetry greats are, they've passed and we miss them, but they've definitely left an impact on us, and we carry that. But that's lovely that you got to meet him.
Mm-hmm.
Is a legend,
Absolutely. Yeah.
So what brought you to poetry in the first place? Like, how did you find poetry? How did poetry find you? When did you start writing?
I feel like poetry found me because I wasn't thinking about it. I wasn't exposed to it. I was in my late teens and I had finished high school barely, and high school wasn't a great experience for me. I felt like I didn't really learn anything. And
Mm.
I was just sitting there at home one day and I just felt compelled to write something. And nobody made me do it. I never did it before. I just got up, went to the junk drawer, with little post-it notes and
Yeah.
a pencil, and I went outside and I wrote my first poem. And after that, I was like, I loved how it made me feel and what it kind of did for me, and I just kept doing it. And then my parents got a computer, like one of those first computers. This was pre-internet in the 80s, and it's just those green screens. It's basically like a typewriter with a screen.
Yes.
And it's just word processing. But I would stay up late typing all my poems into it and saving them onto a floppy disk.
Ooh, floppy disks.
I wish I still had those floppies, but those are gone. There's nowhere to put them anymore anyway. So, but yeah, so that was the first time, and I just kept doing it. So.
Wow, I love that.
Yeah.
Do you remember what like your first poem was about?
I do. I don't. It was bad.
Okay.
It was bad. It was very sad, and it rhymed a lot.
That's okay.
But I sort of remember some of the lines. It was like I was just observing things, and there was a horse-drawn carriage that went by, and I was like, horse-drawn carriage clopping by, little birds up high, see how free they fly. But then it was, but why, oh why must good feelings die? And so that's where I was at the time. I was sort of sad, and,
yeah.
And that was helping me sort of say it out loud in some way. And there was some squirrels in there, and I was just watching stuff in my front yard or whatever at my parents' house when I was a teenager. So yeah, but it was I wish I still had the whole thing, but that was a good introduction, and yeah, I just kept going.
Yeah, and why oh why must they die?
Why oh why must good feelings die?
Yeah. Oh, just like a dagger to the heart,
Yeah.
Mike.
I know.
Such a sad kid. I mean, I was also a sad kid.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think poetry has been, an outlet for us to explore those feelings and to think about them in depth and record them and express them in a way that, at least like gets them out of our body, out of our minds and hearts and onto the page.
Right. Seeing it on the paper was a big deal, and then it's like I had it and I could put it over here, and now I had one, and then I did another, and then I started buying notebooks and filling up the notebooks, and I loved having a record. It was almost like even like a timeline. Like I kind of look at it as like I can go back, I can remember exactly where I was and who I was at that time, so helps me keep track of my life.
Yeah, and you still have those notebooks?
Some of those. So later I was able to take a lot of what was in there and put it, I have some of them in a computer file. The notebooks are gone. Yeah. They got lost in the midst of time. Yeah. But I still have some of them. But still going. It's like still writing, still recording my life with them,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. I feel like my journals, my notebooks have been similar, and I can, remember where I was or what I was experiencing during those times when, I was writing, whether I was writing about, the Backstreet Boys or, a crush in school, or then, mental illness. It was just, it's all there. And it's lovely to have that, to look back on and to see how much growth we have, made, how much we've grown.
Right.
So you brought a Lee Young Lee poem to share with us today.
Oh,
yes. Is there anything we should know about the poem before you read it to us?
I don't. I love Lee Young Lee. He's one of my favorites. My good friend Mike Albert turned me on to him, and I don't know that it's a challenging poem to me. I'm not sure what I'm going to say about it.
That's okay.
Lee Young Lee, his writing is so mysterious to me, and it's kind of like a magic trick. But I could just read it, and you want me to do that?
Yeah.
All right.
Read it for us whenever you're ready.
All right. So this is called Trading for Heaven by Li Young. I saw you at the top of the stairs. Now I live a secret life. I saw you holding open the door. Now I'm filling pages with things I can't tell anyone. Now I'm more alone than I've ever been. I traded every beyond, every someday, for heaven in my lifetime. Now I'm dying of my life. Now I'm alive inside my death. Do you see the space between our bodies? Barely a hand, hardly a breath. It is the space mountains and rivers are made of. It is the beginning of oceans, the space between either and or, both and neither, the happiness of forgetting our names and the happiness of hearing them for the first time. I heard you singing yourself to sleep. It was a song from both our childhoods. And now I don't know if singing is a form of helplessness, time's architecture revealed, or some inborn motive all blood and breath obey to enact a savage wheel. I found you at dawn, sitting by the open kitchen window. You were sorting seeds in a plate. And if you were praying out loud, I'll never tell. And if you were listening to the doves, and if their various wooing and cooing and dying in time are your earliest questions blown back to you through the ragged seasons, and if you've lived your life in answer to those questions, I'll never tell. Your destiny is safe with me. Your childhood is safe with me. What you decide to bury is safe with me.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for reading that. So why this poem? Why bring this poem into us? And I guess, what about this poem is important to you?
It, like so many good poems, it kicks me right out of linear thinking, first of all. But I love, it's a love poem to me, but it's a very mature love poem. It's not a fantasy about love. And the way, the way we can see each other so fully and darkly, but the whole thing about the secrets, living a secret life, filling pages with things I can't tell anyone. It's like, how do you describe love? How do you describe life? You can't really.
Right.
So he's talking around it. He's not really saying what it is. But that ending too of, this is what we in love we provide for each other, this sort of safety. Your destiny is safe with me. Your childhood is safe with me. What you decide to bury is safe. I just think that's so beautiful. Like it's like another way of saying I love you.
Yeah.
It's like, I got you. It's okay.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to hurt you. And I feel like we all want that.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. I could talk about it for a long, long time, but I won't.
Yeah, that definitely, the last stanza really does stand out. And I think it encompasses that feeling that Li Youngli is trying to convey to us. Your childhood is safe with me. What you decide to bury is safe with me. And when we love someone, when we care for them, we see all of them. We see all of those childhood wounds that, we've been told about in therapy that we need to heal from.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I've been told. So
you see your partner at their most vulnerable.
Exactly.
And you get to be that line that I don't know if singing is a form of helplessness. Like, that is
wow,
such a powerful line that you can see someone could be singing, but you also see their pain. You see the full spectrum of their being and everything they do. Just sorting seeds by the window, but you see their whole childhood and you see everything. I don't know. But to say this is safe, like, I just think that's beautiful. You're safe with me,
Yeah, it is. It's so intimate. The line, do you see the space between our bodies? Barely a hand, hardly a breath. It is the space mountains and rivers are made of. So first he's saying, do you see the space between our bodies, which is barely a hand or hardly a breath? But then it's like, it's also the space that mountains and rivers are made of, which is huge. So it's this intimacy that, you're so close to this person, but also this intimacy is it's so grand. It's so vast.
It's connected to everything else, And I don't think, before I ever read this poem, I think when I first read it, I realized, oh, I haven't experienced this yet. I haven't had this, even though I had already been married for 15 years, and now I've been divorced almost as long as I've been married. And I can say now, with the partner I have now, that I do know what this means. but it took a long time to get there,
That's
to really
beautiful.
be able to live this sort of thing, that he's talking about in there.
Yeah. I think when I think about, our lives and like what our purpose is here on earth, I mean, at least for me, it's about connection. It's about love, whether it's romantic love or, friendship or family. It's it's love. Like what
Yeah,
else is it?
right. And it's complicated and it's so nuanced, but when you're younger, you have fantasies about love and what it is, and life is this process of sort of breaking you of your delusions about it and getting down to something real, and not just with relationships, but even just the world and politics and religion and all the ways that people try to kind of control reality and help or fight or whatever. It's like it's so much more, the truth is so much more nuanced,
Mhm.
and we have to grow into that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess that poem says all that to me, but
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I'm curious. And also, like, maybe this is just a question to think about for yourself or for listeners to think about for themselves. But what have we decided to bury? What is that made of? What does that look like? What are we burying? What are you burying?
that makes me think of, there was a Peter Gabriel song called Digging in the Dirt. I think that's what it was called. But the line is, I'm digging in the dirt to find the places that we got hurt. And I think we bury so much, but just because we buried it doesn't mean it's gone, and
Mm,
that it comes back. These things come back up, and we have to kind of, when you really feel safe, that's when that stuff comes up and you start digging in the dirt again and finding those places that you got hurt, and they come up for review again. If you're not careful, they can ruin things,
yes.
but if you do it with love and compassion, that you can sort of work through all that stuff. And you don't realize sometimes how much you've buried until, I feel like at this point in my life now, like, oh my God, so much was buried. And it keeps coming back up.
You're like, oh
Won't stay
man.
down there, but it's okay. Like, I want to look at it. So
Yeah.
yeah, look
That's
at all of it.
That's a really empowering statement. Like, I want to look at it. I want to look at it
And I
all.
want her to look at it, and you, and I want everybody to do that,
Mm,
like, and let's make it okay to do that,
hmm. Yeah.
and that's tying into beat night and poetry readings and open mics. And it's like, that's part of why all of that is sacred to me, like keeping that microphone open for
Yes.
anybody can come in, and you can get up and you can be vulnerable and talk about the stuff you buried or whatever is going on, and just let everyone hear it. And you're going to be applauded and you're going to be embraced, and no one's going to judge you. And that's really important. That's like that's sacred.
Mm. Yeah, and that's true community too, and
Yeah.
and that's poetry that's building that, thinking about the mission. And I see that mission, clearly playing out in what you do in the community and like continue to do and will like can do in the future. Like I see that and it's, really something that I admire. And, as poet laureates in this little room of mine right now recording this, like I see that and I see, how seriously you've taken this position, how you took this position, how you continue to do these things even after, having been the poet laureate. You continue to, really put the community at the forefront and provide a space for them. And that's definitely something to admire. And like I want to build upon that and continue that legacy of building community.
Yeah. And you are. And the thing that, again, that I didn't realize till later, because, and this is typical, I think, of poets, is they often, not often, maybe all the time, we're writing by yourself, and it's
Right.
a solitary thing. And I never went to a poetry reading until I was 30 years old, but I had been writing since I was a teenager.
Wow.
And that first time, which was at the press room at Beat Night, and that first time I did it, I realized something, that, oh, this process, the writing process isn't finished until I read it to somebody, until I share it with this community, or even just one other person. But that the sharing of it is so necessary to the process, and that was such a big deal to me. And I, again and again at readings, you see when somebody gets up there and reads for the first time in their life, and I see myself in that, and I know how hard their heart is pounding at that moment. And I know what a big deal it is to be standing there and sharing that thing with the community, and how important it is that they get a warm reception. And yeah, I live for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I found this Lee Young Lee quote online, and it's from an interview in 2008 with the Literary Arts in Portland, Oregon. And he was talking about the poems that he read, which happened to be Trading for Heaven was one of them. And I really just want to read this quote and maybe just, talk about it. Or, I mean, I feel like we've already touched on it, but he just says this so beautifully. I just had to share. So he says, "Before you fall in love, before you find somebody who loves you, you're isolated and terrified and lonely. Then you fall in love and you are overwhelmed and inhabited by giant feelings and thoughts and cosmic-sized angels walking in and out of you. And you can't articulate these feelings to anybody. And then you find that you can't even articulate them to the beloved, and you're more lonely than when you started. But I have a theory about that. Romantic love may be ultimately supposed to bring you to a place where you can encounter God. It's a way to wean you from the world and then from the beloved, the mortal beloved, to discover an immortal beloved. But I might be wrong." End quote.
Does he say I might be wrong?
He does. He does say, but I might be wrong.
Wow. I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
And that he's not just connecting it to the mountains and the rivers now. He's going beyond. But yeah, maybe the personal relationship can be a microcosm of that macro relationship between yourself and God, divinity, whatever you want to call it.
Exactly. Or even a greater connection to yourself. And I mean, I think that's I mean, I believe that we're spiritual beings, regardless of what religion we believe in or anything like that. But spirituality means, to me, it's synonymous with connection, whether it's connection with something that's outside of you, a higher power of some sort, or something within you and, to the people around you. And to me, I can see that as, learning to love another person, a beloved, then allows us and gives us permission to then encounter ourselves and love ourselves. And that to me was what I took away from that quote. That is the lesson of life for me. I'm like, whoa, there we go. That's it. Like he hit it on the nose.
And you just hit it on the nose too. There's nothing I can add.
No, don't say that.
That's beautiful.
Well, what you can add for us is your own poem.
Oh.
Yeah. Is there anything you want to tell us about this poem before you read it to us?
So this poem, I've been working on a new book, which is about sort of the last 15 years from divorce to now. And sort of the journey through a bunch of different relationships, and kind of like in what you were just saying, not just, finding the right person, but it's all the growth that I went through and finding myself, loving myself. This poem sort of takes what Lee Young Lee just said and maybe explodes it a little bit. And I'll read it, and then I have more to say about that. So I'll read this. In the doorway. I can see where your story is leading, because I was there 17 years ago, bargaining with love. We're out here drinking in the doorway of this church because you don't want to go home to your kind but complacent husband. You're starving for new memories, for the motion of those polyamorous stars above us. With our cans of wine and paper bags, I can imagine the priest who had the church built hundreds of years ago talking to the devil, because the devil always visits new churches. I bet they sat right here, swilling the blood of Christ, talking about God and the fall from Eden, and the devil said to the priest, "You like it better outside the church, don't you? From here, you can see all the way to heaven."
Perfect. Yeah.
So the way this attaches to the Lee Young Lee is, yes, love, but then I feel like we all have this dichotomy. We want love, and we crave safety, security, sameness, whether it's relationships or religion or whatever it is, but that we also have this sort of creative fire that wants to break free of all of it, of all the constraints. And in this poem, I had already been through my own divorce, and I was now sitting with this friend of mine who was now going also through a divorce, and we were talking about it. And it was almost like there wasn't necessarily a problem. She just felt like she wasn't ready for whatever it was, and that she needed to break free from it. And like I said, she was starving for new memories. Maybe she was too young, like I think I was too. But that this speaks to that dichotomy, I think that's in everybody, of that craving for security and safety, but also the need to break free from it. And that I have found for myself, the more attentive I am to my creative self, like with writing or painting or whatever it is, that satisfies that. Like I notice sometimes still, like if I'm feeling antsy in my relationship, it's because I'm not attending to my creative self enough. And that when I can get to that satisfies. If I could tend that creative fire, that calms me down, Yeah. But the devil here in this poem, to me, the devil is never really evil in a way. It's just like the temptation in the sense of asking you these questions, of saying, really, what do you really want? What are you really doing here? Is lighting a fire under you to get you to ask some bigger questions. So
yeah. Wow, I love hearing the backstory of this poem. And now hearing that, like I'm looking at this poem in a completely different way. But I was really interested in like your subverting of, religious elements that we're so used to seeing. We're used to seeing, or hearing about the devil, the Garden of Eden, and, the blood of Christ. And I just really like how you're subverting our expectations of that, and also, subverting our expectations of what heaven is too. Yeah. I'm curious, like, what do you imagine heaven to be like? Do you believe in heaven? Or what does heaven mean to you?
Okay.
We ask the big questions here.
Wow. I sort of imagine that the universe is a hierarchy of beings. We are one of them. We're at one stage, and that there are stages above this that we can grow into. Ooh. You could say angels and demigods and gods and beyond, and whatever. There may be many, many layers to it all. But yeah, I just think, and before us, element, plant, animal, and we're somewhere between animal and angel, and that we're still evolving. It's not a fixed thing, and that spiritually I think there's so much more than what we see and what our senses can sense. And that, I think there's a lot of evolving to do. And that, maybe one day we'll all be angels looking down compassionately at all the humans struggling on Earth or some other world or whatever. But we're all somewhere on that spectrum of spiritual evolution. And we're just one temporary form after another,
Yeah. Wow. I love that. Somewhere between animal and angel. I had to write it down. You should write it down. That should be in a poem.
I did write it down somewhere.
Okay, good. Because
I think it is in a poem.
Okay, good. Because that was like, whoa, wow. Yeah, we are somewhere between animal and angel. And then like the alliteration just got, so anyway, that's beautiful, and beautiful to think about how we are constantly evolving, and that we one day might reach, a level of angel, whatever that means. But I think the way that you represented it or pictured it is that an angel is just someone full of, or a being of some sort, full of compassion and empathy. And like, isn't that what we're trying to do as humans? Like, that's our goal, is like how to be more empathetic and compassionate to those around us. How can we be more, compassionate towards ourselves? And like, to be an angel is to reach a level in which you can do that easily. Like, it's second nature, and you don't have to think about it.
Yeah.
I love that definition and that picture that you painted.
Yeah, I like the way you just described it too.
Speaking of painting, you are a painter.
Uh-huh.
Tell us about your paintings. Tell us more.
Well, yeah. You can see almost most of those paintings at spacebstudio.com. I'm not really selling anything there, but I just put all my artwork and stuff there. I have a thing for bees. We talked about there were bees in the window when we first came into this room, which I thought was a great little omen because I paint a lot of bees, and I've been working on a children's book for a long time about a bee, and so yeah, I just gotta. But also the bee story has let me get into painting other animals, just nature. I love it. It was just an excuse to paint all of this moons and clouds and foxes and crows, and they're all in this book, which you can see most of those paintings. So the book is being worked on, but I'm also working on a tarot deck. And just the major arcana right now, which I've completed, which is just 22 cards. So that's another project that's taken a long time to do. That just gives me an excuse to paint. The subject matter and symbolism and all this stuff. And the tarot I love is also, it's about that spiritual journey,
exactly,
of awakening.
Yeah. Oh, I love how I did not know you were a painter. I knew that you were a visual artist of some sort, but I didn't know like what medium you worked in. And that's beautiful that you're a painter and that you're able to, create in several ways, not just with words, but also with paint. Visually, you can paint that picture and you can,
it's really challenging and really satisfying. And usually almost every time when I start a painting, there's like this wave of kind of imposter syndrome and stuff that comes like, what am I doing? It looks terrible. Oh, but then I keep doing it. I keep working at it. Eventually it comes to life and I'm like, oh, and there's like this such intense satisfaction with it.
Yeah.
So
I'm curious if you've ever, written a poem about a painting, or the other way around. You have a poem and you have a painting. Kind of like if thinking about the previous episode with Jonathan Riley, something like an ekphrastic poem. Have you ever done something like that?
Well, the poet laureate before you, Tammy, one of her projects was getting poets and painters together and using a Japanese style of poetry to create just what you're talking about. And so John Michael Albert, he wrote a poem, and then and we put those together, and that was such a fun project to do. Yeah, it's really fun. But the children's book too is kind of like that, because I wrote the story, and now I have to figure out how do you tell the story with the pictures, with the images. So
right,
yeah, it's very satisfying.
Well, I can't wait to
fun.
I can't wait to see this children's book about a bee.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm afraid of bees, but I think the bee in your book will be just fine. I think I'll be safe.
It's okay. Yeah, she's nice.
Does she have a name?
Gina.
Gina the bee?
Gina. Oh. And I picked Gina because I never had a daughter, but I always thought if I had a daughter, I would have named her Gina. So I just love that name. So now I have Gina the bee.
She is your daughter.
She's my daughter.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think like my book, Ugly Music, that's my baby. It's a labor of love, and
it is.
There's Gina right there for you.
You're birthing it into the world, and making it real. So
that's so beautiful and tender and lovely. Wow, I'm learning so much about you today.
Oh, good.
I love this.
I'm glad there's something new there.
Oh yeah, so many new things. Oh. Wow. I mean, we could keep going and going, but now is the time for the gluten-free segment, or glutton-free, as I like to call it, where we leave you with a little morsel you don't need to feel guilty about indulging in, usually a writing prompt related to the poems we've heard or topics we've discussed. So, Mike, what do we have for the people today? And we can also think this through.
Well, I was thinking with that Lee Young Lee poem, what I love about it, and maybe in general, what I love about poetry is that he's just talking about something without going directly at it. And I feel like that's always the challenge, is to not explain anything, but he's giving you all this incredible imagery. And that's why you come away with it from it like, oh, this is a love poem, but he's not saying, I love you so much, or he's not, doing that. He's talking all around it. That's the challenge. If I was gonna give people a prompt, it's like, pick anything in anything, even just the cat or whatever is in front of you, and write about it without without saying the word cat.
Yeah.
or don't talk about what the cat's doing, but create symbolism around it and talk about it without talking about it. That's
Yeah.
a fun little challenge.
Yeah.
Is that good?
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. I think like even just like writing a love poem, like the love poem to the cat, or a love
Right.
poem to a person, someone that you hold dear, and like not using the word love. And I think like, I feel like you've also, in a way here, this is also a love poem that you've written. Do you feel that way, that your poem is also a love poem?
This one, yeah, it is, because I'm trying to, we're breaking away from it, but also still looking for it. And what is it? And that, as we've already discussed, like that sort of how it's connected to everything else. Like what I love what you said earlier too about the relationship with God and stuff like that. Yeah, it's not easy to do.
Love.
But if you're writing a Hallmark card, it's very easy
Oh,
to
yes.
write, but writing a poem by sort of really kind of just dancing around the thing instead of going right at it. That's the challenge. What does love look like?
Right. Yeah. Like even thinking about Lee Young Lee's poem, thinking about like you were sorting seeds in a plate. Like, what is your beloved doing? What mundane activity is your beloved
Right.
doing? And how can you put that into a love poem? I think that really, that little moment shows so much love, just observing the
Right.
beloved sorting seeds. And that's something that I would, suggest people try, is putting like those little mundane elements that almost, in a way, like you see them all the time, but let them stand out in this poem as something that's like so special and intimate that could easily be overlooked, but we're finally, really zeroing in and paying attention to it. I think that's love in itself. I think that's love in itself, just paying, special attention
Right.
to those small moments.
And the other thing that I feel like over time that I've understood more and more is like really trusting your reader or whoever's listening to sort of get it without explaining things, because the moment you start reading something, that person's imagination is being activated, and you have to leave room for them to bring themselves into it, whatever.
Exactly.
You're triggering them. You're gently triggering them, triggering memories and stuff. You don't want to sit there and just explain how you feel. It's like the genius of this poem, Lee Young Lee's poem, is he's giving you all this imagery and it invokes all this feeling. And it's not that you can perfectly describe it or anything, but you're feeling, it's causing you to feel things. And that's the best it can do, So trust your reader.
Yeah. Take them on the journey, but don't give them all the information.
Don't give them everything.
Right. We're withholding here. Don't,
Like so often you probably have the same experience where it's like that last stanza of a poem, like you go back later and you go, oh, I went too far.
Right.
I said a little too much, and that's the whole kill your darlings thing, I think.
Right.
But that happens in the editing process. Sometimes the first draft is too much.
Oh, that's wonderful. Perfect. So listeners, if you write a poem using the prompts we've suggested, we ask that you hold onto it, and soon we will be making a call for submissions to not only share some of these poems on future episodes, but also publish them as part of an anthology. More information on that soon. So just a quick update since this recording, we are now accepting submissions for the Bread and Poetry Anthology. So please submit your poems to pplpsubmissions@gmail.com, or you can submit using the form linked in the show notes, on our Instagram bio at Bread and Poetry Podcast, or on my website at diannelyantigua.com. As a reference, you can also find a link in the show notes and on Instagram to an archive of the writing prompts on each episode so far. So, Mike, anything you'd like to promote in the area, community highlights of any sort?
Whoever doesn't know about Beat Night should come to Beat Night.
Yeah.
Right?
Tell them where and when.
The third Thursday of the month. It's been happening for the last 23 years. It's now at Book and Bar. So yeah, you should come to Beat Night. If you're a poet and you've never read before, do it.
Mm-hmm.
Come to Beat Night. And also the Hoot reading, which is start up again in September, the first Wednesday of every month. So also that, which we're not sure where its home is going to be yet, but there'll be more information about that coming. But, write your poems and then read them to us, please.
Right. Perfect. Where can people find you and your work?
You could probably go to hivepoetry.com, and that from there, that connects to my little publisher, the V-Monk Press, and then Space Bee Studio, and you can there's a lot of stuff there to check out.
Perfect. Awesome. So thank you again, Mike, for joining us. This was a lovely conversation, like actually lovely, because we were talking about love.
Love.
Right.
A lot of love. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Diannely. It was such a pleasure and an honor to be here.
And thank you, listeners, for tuning in. This has been Bread and Poetry Podcast. You can follow us on Instagram at Bread and Poetry Podcast and Twitter at Bread Poetry Pod. Please rate, review, and subscribe to keep this thing kicking. This podcast is sponsored by the Portsmouth Poet Laureate Program. Follow them on Instagram at PPLPNH. Please consider making a donation at pplp.org/donate to help fund this volunteer-run nonprofit in its mission to further build community through poetry. Cover art for this podcast is by Najee Brown, and theme music is by Stu Diaz. Stay tuned for more episodes of Bread and Poetry, because truly, who doesn't love bread? And who doesn't love poetry? Until then, my dear ones.
I suddenly felt like I had to get out of there. And so I left. I left the house and I walked out into the little area and I looked back at the house and I looked up and I thought I saw a kid in the window. Yep.
My heart. Oh my God.
And then I just kept thinking, but the stairs are walled off, so no one could go up there. And I'm like, and then it was just it was like a flash. It was just like, and it was gone. Like I looked away and then I looked back and it was not there. But I felt that oppressive feeling that was what was really, really terrifying. And years later, as an adult, I have gone back to that house many times. And when I used to live in town, like at night, I would ride my bike over there and I would just sit and I would look at that house and I'm like, I want to, where's, and I had nothing, I would see nothing and feel nothing. But anyway, that was my little Portsmouth ghost story.
Well, maybe it was like a one-time ghost blessing or blessing. I don't know if blessing is the word, but I
don't know. Maybe there are many other ghost stories I can tell you that happened years later.
Oh, wow. So maybe it's you, like they feel comfortable visiting you.
Maybe it's me.
Yeah. They want you to tell their story.
Trying. Just leave me alone. Stop haunting me.